Because do you want your daughter to think making a mistake means that you can't go on in life, but you should just sit around and blame yourself? Is that the message that you want your daughter to get? Oh, no. Because everyone is certain to make mistakes. So you know that your daughter will make them. It's only what she learns from you about what that means and how to deal with them. And that was the piece that really got her to change that image and see a her who could do it powerfully. It's when I changed it to the context of her daughter and how her daughter was going to, how she wanted her daughter to deal with it. That make sense? Yeah. She was willing to do things for her daughter that she wasn't quite ready to do just for herself. So, so that's an example of switch referential index. You got that one? Ready to play? All right. We only will have a few minutes, and I think that's all we'll need. Again, do it in groups of 3, so you can and do it as a team. Go back and forth. A new group of 3. Come out with a belief real quickly. And A, probably the A causes B are going to be more useful on this one. They'll be easier to work with. And then we'll run through the list. How many times, I should say, have you already had the experience today of doing something just because it fit the form, where you didn't really expect anything particularly useful to come out, and it turned out somehow interesting or useful?
Yes.
Yes, yes. And that, I think, is part of the value, one of the key values in doing it like this, where you just stick with one form, is that so many times something interesting comes out of a place we didn't expect, or a form that we didn't expect. And that's a lesson for me that continually encourages me to do things, always, that I don't necessarily think, it's not necessarily in my, quote, range of usual behavior, but that much more can become a part of our range of usual behavior, and that's very supportive to what we want to have happen in the world. Okay, you might take a moment, just a full 20 to 30 seconds, because you deserve to have a time of really letting yourself even more fully relax and enjoy yourself right at this moment, whatever your current state is. Even in including all of those things that you consider limitations, or you have considered something not so particularly great, any of that has come to your awareness can be a part, and a particularly significant part, of what you can let yourself just embrace and appreciate at this moment. So that as you sit there comfortably, noticing where you're already particularly relaxed and where you're becoming even more relaxed. Because along with the relaxation, you can let that sense of enjoyment and appreciation also spread through your whole being, your physical being and beyond. And as you breathe in, you may have the sense of new life and new energy entering your being that you can absorb. And you may have the sense of it coming in primarily through your mouth and nose, or it may be almost as if that energy is coming from all directions into every cell of your being. And as you breathe out, you can have the sense that any tension or anything that you don't really have any need for anymore can just flow out along with your breath. And again, it doesn't really matter if you sense that moving out through your mouth and nose, or if there's a sense that it actually comes out from anywhere and moves out and away. Leaving more space as you breathe in for more of that energy and fullness to fill you in all those spaces that are cleared. So letting yourself exhale out anything no longer needed, and inhaling, breathing in with your whole being, a sense of energy, vitality coming in and returning even more fully to your being several more times. And then whenever you're ready, you can let yourself return your attention to here and now in this room with a sense of renewed vitality and relaxation and appreciation. And enjoy your evening. Don't stop yourself from the automatic expressions of language and presuppositions that find their way out of your lips. And in the event that you discover that you're utilizing counterexamples and switch referential index and change frame along with it, that's all right, although there's really no need to recognize that consciously while you enjoy a relaxed evening tonight. What I'd like to do is give you several examples of a pattern that I found particularly useful. And I think it will be an example for you of how, as you play with language more and more in your life context, of how you can go farther than the invented list. There's nothing magical about this list that says, oops, these are the only ones you can use now. No more. So when you just go for a goal, and my outcome now is to get a result, and anything that comes out of my mouth, we'll find out if it works. And then you start noticing what works, and which is what I was doing. And there was a point where there were 3 examples of something that I had a feeling of similarity about. These 3 examples felt similar to me, and I couldn't quite figure out what was similar about them. But they'd worked really well, and so I went to Steve and I said, okay, here are 3 examples. Let me tell you what happened. This is what we did. How are these the same? And that's how we developed this particular pattern, which we've now got in a standard format so that you can use it really easily and on purpose. Because I hadn't been using this with intention. It just came out, and I recognized the similarity at a certain point. They actually sounded more different in the original forms than the way I'm going to give them to you. So I'm going to give you 3 examples and find out, and you search for the form. You do what we did on this, and then I'll if you don't already have it, I'll give it to you. So here's example number 1. I was doing some language. This was in the phase where I was going, okay, nothing else. I will not use NLP procedures. We'll just see what happens to get the result. So this man said, let's see if I can remember it pretty exactly. His complaint was, how do I deal with objectionable people or something like that? And I had him come up and said, okay, now what is it exactly that you want? He said, well, there are certain clients that I work with that they tell me what they want, and I tell them what to do to get it, and then they give me every reason in the world not to do it. And he was very annoyed. You could tell that. So I looked at him and I said, oh, and do they help you in other ways too? Now, that one, I hadn't intended that as a one-liner. I just thought, oh, that sounds kind of cute. Let's find out what happens. And I said that, and smoke started pouring out of his. This was one of those where the sweat and the flushing and all of that, all of the physiological signs of rapid integration were happening. And he sat there a while, just cooking on that one, letting that integrate. And he said something like, well, that's your change of things. And he said later that had made a difference. He made a comment later that he'd noticed a shift in how he responded to those people. Now, it was interesting to me because this person had been through the practitioner training. He'd heard all the NLP presuppositions about there's no such thing as objection. It's all feedback and information and all that kind of thing. But yet it hadn't gone in that way, in a way that it applied in that context. Okay, another example. Man had a phobia of flying. And since I was doing language patterns, of course I didn't want to just do the phobia technique. That would be too easy. And I was curious as to whether or not with just language we could make a change in that. So I thought I'd explore that. And as a backup, I could always pull out the phobia process and so on. So I asked him some initial questions. Well, how do you manage to have this response? And he started telling me about how, he said, well, I have a thing about being in control. He was just real straight out about it. I just can't stand being in situations where I'm not in control. And this is a thing for me across the board in life. And going on airplanes, just I'm not in control. And then in addition, he said this whole thing started when he was working as a professor back in the days before, when acid wasn't really very much, people weren't familiar with it, and they were doing experiments on it in colleges and so on. So as a college professor, he had access to it. And they didn't know such things like what kind of dose was normal. So he took what would be something like at least 10 times a usual good, strong dose, and without knowing that. And he said that his experience was he started just losing it. He'd lost his sense of what was real, what wasn't real, and he said that he was so freaked out, he was convinced that either he was going permanently psychotic or he was dying, one or the other, and he had no idea which it was. So,
Needless to say, that was a trauma. So there was a traumatic incident. We could have done some re-imprinting or some trauma work of some kind too. So again, it's like there's no best choice, but there are many possibilities here of how we could work with this. So he told me this, and I resisted the temptation to pull out a procedure. Whoop, must have been a good idea. And I kept asking him some questions, and I said, oh, well, first thing I did was go for a counterexample. Surely there are some times in your life when you're not in control and things are fine anyway. Sounded good to me. And he said, well, no, not really. And I said, well, surely there's sometimes when just for a moment you're out of control. Like, for example, if you go riding on a bus, and sure, you could maybe get the driver to stop after a while, but at that moment, you're not in control. The bus driver is driving the bus, and there's nothing you can do about it. And he goes, well, that's okay, because I know that within 10 minutes, I could get him to stop. It might take me 10 minutes, but I could get him to stop. And so I said, so it's okay if you're not in control for 10 minutes, but more than that is not okay? Is that what you're saying? Because I wanted to get this narrowed down. Because once again, everything is either an intervention or information gathering. That turned out to be information gathering. It wasn't an intervention, but it was very useful to me to start narrowing in on his model of the world, how these things made sense to him. And he goes, yeah, if it's more than 10 minutes, not okay. And if it's less than 10 minutes, I'm cool. And he said, and he was talking about how even in his marriage, he knew that if he needed to, he could get a divorce. You know, he didn't intend to, but there's that sense of knowing that he could, that made him feel comfortable to go ahead and make the commitment. So it was a theme. So we start going on, and I said to him, oh, at some point I said, well, why do you even want to get over this? Maybe you just don't want to take the risk. Maybe it's not worth it. It is a certain risk. So maybe it's better just to not fly. And he said, oh, no, I really want to be able to. I know it's a risk, but I'm willing to take a calculated risk because I want to do things like fly to Europe. And I just, I don't want to spend 6 months on a boat. I'd like to be able to fly and get to Europe. Can't drive. And actually, he wasn't comfortable in boats either, come to think of it, because there was more than 10 minutes outside his control. He realized that as we were talking. And so I said, okay, so are you telling me that if you could get in an airplane and go up 10 minutes and come back down, and go up 10 minutes and come back down, and do that all the way to Europe, that then it would be fine? And he said, yeah. He thought that over, and he went, yeah. Either I would have to get more information where he'd have to start telling me how his original logic was off, and it was really something else, and I would get more information that way, or he had to agree, because it did fit the form of what he told me. And yet, this is not boxing someone in. Sometimes people in arguments try to argue, and, well, you said this, so therefore this has to be true. We're not doing that. It's not about that. It's finding out, does this really hold for him? And if not, I want to know about it, because I want to know what does really hold for him. So he said, yeah, that would work. And I said, okay, so in what way would your doing it that way, you're going all the way to Europe, where you go up 10 minutes and down, and up 10 minutes and down, and up 10 minutes and down again, and up 10 minutes and down again. We drew this out. All the way to Europe. In what way would that mean you were actually, now that you think about it, less in control than if you were able to, when you choose, and when you, because with the control, when you choose and when you decide you want to go to Europe, that you can just get on a plane in any state that you want to be in and go all the way to Europe in one trip? And he kind of looked at me and he started getting confused. He started making some shifts. He said, I don't know what you said. So I said, okay, let me say it again a little differently. In what way will you actually, I think I used the word, in what way would you actually be more in control